Tim Armstrong, songwriter, producer, label head, artist, punk rocker. Tim Armstrong's the greatest songwriter in punk rock history. Here's the evidence for that claim. For about a year and a half, and starting in 1985, there was Basic Radio. Basic Radio was a ska band formed in 1985 in Berkeley, California, mainly from members of Urban Noise, and played some shows in the San Francisco Bay Area with other East Bay bands such as the Uptones, Freaky Executives, and Primus. Members of Basic Radio went on to form Operation Ivy, Rancid, Critical Mass, Elephant Men, and Tilt. I've heard very little of this music, but if I remember correctly, it's like a darker, more jam band version of Operation Ivy as far as I can tell. In 1987, though, he formed Operation Ivy and changed music completely by blending ska and punk and essentially creating a sound that wasn't really around yet. Few bands were having punk rock songs and ska or reggae songs in their catalog, but very few of them blended it together so seamlessly. 1987, the band formed and started writing music, demoing songs, and playing shows and parties. 1988, they released the Hectic EP on Lookout Records. 1989, Energy on Lookout Records was their original 19-song LP. In 1991, post-Op Ivy but pre-Rancid, they released Operation Ivy self-titled on Lookout Records, which is a 27-song reissue of all the songs released on Lookout Records. Then, in 2007, Operation Ivy self-titled was released on Hellcat Records, and it's a remastered re-release of the 1991 version of Energy, including the band's Hectic EP and compilation tracks. They weren't around long. They didn't write a lot of music, but they changed punk rock forever. The band appeared on a few comps over the years, and there are a bunch of bootlegs floating around that people like to collect, most of which were never given the okay by the band, but collectors and fans still like to have them. With Operation Ivy, Tim changed music for the first time. It wouldn't be his last either. There have been many bands influenced by the blend of ska and punk rock perfected by them, but it has never been replicated. They are solely responsible for the uprising of the third wave of ska, where bands like Real Big Fish, Less Than Jake, Against All Authority, Suicide Machines, Mustard Plug, Skank and Pickle, and many more were birthed and ultimately thrived when bands like No Doubt and Sublime blew up on national radio and MTV. Many bands have tried to copy the style of Operation Ivy, but none have succeeded to catch the same magic that Tim and the fellas captured in the late 80s. But this is the first time that Tim Armstrong changed music. After Operation Ivy broke up in 1989, Tim Armstrong had a couple other projects. Special Forces and Downfall, most notably. Those were in between Operation Ivy and Rancid in 1991. Then, in 1991, all the way through present day, as of the recording of this video, we've got Rancid. Formed in Berkeley, California in 1991 by childhood friends Tim Armstrong and Matt Freeman. When Operation Ivy broke up, Armstrong and Freeman decided to form a new band, a ska punk band called Downfall, which disbanded after a few months. Then they started a hardcore punk band called Generator, which also disbanded shortly after. They also started the ska-influenced Dancehall Crashers, though they left the band shortly after it was formed. During this time, Tim Armstrong was struggling with alcoholism, and to keep him focused on other interests, Matt Freeman suggested they form a new band. In 1991, they recruited Armstrong's roommate Brett Reed as their drummer and formed Rancid. A few months after the band's inception, Rancid began performing around the Berkeley area and quickly developed a fan following. Their first recorded release was a 1992 EP for Operation Ivy's old label Lookout Records. Shortly after releasing that 7-inch, the band left Lookout Records and was signed to Bad Religion guitarist Brett Gerwitz's record label Epitaph Records. Rancid released its self-titled debut album through Epitaph in 1993. A couple notable releases from the Rancid discography are as follows. They have the Molotov Cocktail EP in 1992 that was on Lookout. It's the first official release for the band. Very raw and fast, the most street punk that Rancid has ever sounded, in my opinion. Just recently got re-released by the band and uploaded on streaming platforms as well. You got to check this one out if you haven't already. In 1994, on Epitaph Records, they have Let's Go. The addition of Lars Fredriksson completed the sound that they were looking to make with the band. The addition of the lead guitar really thickened the sound and provided a lot of freedom in writing songs. Lars was asked to join the band in 1993, but he couldn't because he was playing with the UK subs. Then Billy Joe of Green Day co-wrote their first big hit, Radio, and then was asked to join the band, but he declined because he wanted to concentrate on Green Day, who hadn't quite blown up yet, but were about to. After hanging out with Lars again, and after Billy Joe had declined to join the band, Lars changed his mind and joined Rancid. I believe the song Salvation had a music video that got on MTV from this record as well. In 1995, on Epitaph, we have And Out Come the Wolves, the punk rock album of that year, and their best album, in my opinion, the greatest punk rock record of all time. The band officially figured out their sound with this album and reached superstar status off the back of songs like Time Bomb, Ruby Soho, and Roots Radicals. This is a fan favorite and went platinum in the US and gold in Australia, Canada, and the UK. This album is very well produced and written perfectly. There are anthemic stories told over street punk riffs and slick ska chords, and the Rancid sound was born. And then in 1998, on Hellcat Records, distributed through Epitaph, we get Life Won't Wait. This record is very long, but it's incredibly eclectic. It was recorded all over the world and has a lot of guest appearances from everybody from Dickie Barrett from the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones to reggae legend Buju Banton. Life Won't Wait is a very important album. It really stretched the limitations of what Rancid could do musically, and I think it's their magnum opus. It's their greatest achievement. It may not be my favorite record, but it's fantastic. It's perfect. And I mean, I have the tattoo of the skull on my throat from that album. It's an incredibly important record to me. It was the last thing Rancid released before my dad died. So this album is incredibly special to me. In 2003, on Hellcat Records and distributed by Epitaph and Warner Brothers, we get Indestructible. This album is notable because it was the first time that they were ever distributed and associated with a major label. But a lot of people argued that they were signed to a major label, but they weren't. It was just a distribution deal through Epitaph. That album was also notable because it was, to my understanding, all but rewritten after a bunch of just internal turmoil, personal problems. I think Tim might have fallen off the wagon. I know him and Brody Dahl got divorced. I think Lars lost his brother around this time, and the album was supposed to be completely different as far as I know, but we ultimately got what is, in my opinion, a classic Rancid record. With a song like Fall Back Down, while it might be a little corny lyrically to some people, it is an absolutely fantastic song about brotherhood and friendship. You only get these kind of songs through bands like Rancid. And then last year, in 2023, we get Tomorrow Never Comes. The reason it's notable is because it's their 10th album, and they still were able to bring it. This album is fantastic. It still holds up. They still can write great music, and I would say the most notable tracks are probably the title track, Tomorrow Never Comes, and Live Forever, as it's a typical fast punk rock anthem that they kind of have on most of their records. Rancid have perfected a sound that blends ska and punk and created the Hellcat sound, or the Rancid sound. And there have been a lot of bands, from the Distillers and the Interrupters to Left Alone, and a bunch of bands in Indonesia that have emulated the sound created by Rancid. They have a very unique sound that only they can pull off in the way they do it. It wasn't only the genre of music or the sound that Tim created that was changing music. It was his label, Hellcat Records. That label helped propel some of the best punk bands of that era to the front of the scene, with early releases from the Dropkick Murphys, Distillers, Choking Victim, Leftover Crack, F-, GBH had a later album on Hellcat, Tiger Army, and many more. This is the second way that Tim Armstrong changed music. In 1999, Tim started a new band, the Transplants. When Tim Armstrong played Rob Aston, Skinhead Rob, his friend and roadie for Rancid, some beats that he had made using Pro Tools, he asked him if he would consider contributing lyrics. Initially, Tim played all the instruments himself, but as the project grew, he invited musician friends such as Matt Freeman, Lars Fredriksson, and Vic Ruggiero from the Slackers to add to the sound. Before long, Armstrong and Skinhead Rob decided to officially form a band. But to make things complete, they needed a drummer. They asked Travis Barker from Blink-182, and he joined the band in 2002. A couple of notable releases from the Transplants are their self-titled 2002 album on Hellcat Records. That album was completely mind-blowing, blending punk rock, hip-hop, and other sounds. They had a couple of songs that I really enjoyed, most notably Tall Cans in the Air. I love that track. But then you had Diamonds and Guns, which was featured on a commercial. Sad But True. You had Tim Armstrong playing guitar and making beats, Travis Barker playing drums. Tim Armstrong also sang, of course. And then you had Skinhead Rob doing like this like yelling rap thing over the music. And you know, it's polarizing. Some people don't like it. I personally think it's wonderful. In the summer of 2005, we got their second album, Haunted Cities. And then the winter, Paul Wall released a chopped and screwed version of that album as well, forming a huge connection between Houston underground hip hop and California punk rock. Me being from Houston, I thought that was absolutely amazing. That collab was mind-blowing to me. Chopped and screwed music is a cultural thing down here. It's something that we all love, and it's strictly a Houston thing as far as authentic chopped and screwed music. R.I.P. DJ Screw. With the Transplants, Tim developed another new sound that was incredibly original, hugely popular, and impossible to emulate. Like I mentioned before, there was a song of theirs, Diamonds and Guns, from their first album on a Garnier Fructis commercial for shampoo. When I heard it, it blew my mind. So, Tim Armstrong. He has changed music in a broad sense, but even more important, he has changed punk rock. Forever. He was instrumental in the creation of the third wave of ska. He created the Rancid style of California punk rock, and then he blended it all with hip-hop in a way that has never been done before or replicated since. He also has a solo album, A Poet's Life, that showcases his love for reggae and his ability to write catchy dance tunes with an island flavor, and has a collection of songs with tons of artists under the name Tim Timebomb and Friends, where he reworks old-school Rancid songs, covers a bunch of songs that he just likes, and even has a couple originals where they're all played with acoustic instruments. Sounds ranging from country and Zydeco to old-timey gospel and singer-songwriter Bob Dylan type sounds, even some blues. The best part of all of this is that it all worked. It worked so well, there are no bands that even sound like the Transplants, and all the bands trying to sound like Rancid or Operation Ivy, while often good, and with all due respect, they just don't do it as well as Tim Armstrong does. When you put this in a list that includes his work with mega pop star Pink and reggae icon Jimmy Cliff, that he won Grammy Awards with each, it's undeniable his effect on music. He also wrote for and produced for a bunch of artists, including The Interrupters, AFI, Leftover Crack, and many more. He has undeniably changed punk rock for the better. He has helped many bands in many ways. He is the greatest songwriter in the history of punk rock music.